Okay, let's get into the generalized motor program schema theory versus the dynamic system theory. I'm just going to review them real quick. This is heavier stuff, I will say, the that it was tricky, some of these concepts, especially the dynamic system theory. I don't think I felt I understood that one quite as well, but here goes. Um, Generalized motor program schema theory, that's where a set program in memory that we recall. You're kind of talking about memory, you're storing what's the movement pattern, what are you doing, and then you go ahead and execute it when you need to. Um, but the more generalized feature of it was you have a sequence of actions, invariant features, meaning things that kind of stay the same. The sequence of action is the same, the relative timing of the action is the same, the relative force is the same. You think about throwing a baseball, your elbow comes back first, then it comes through, your wrist is there, and then you follow through. Well, that timing is the same whether I go really slow elbow or if I really crank it up, right? It's still that sequence of action. So those are all relative features that stay the same of that motion across almost any throw that I do. Then you have parameters that are kind of the things that affect it. Then you get into the duration and force of, say, that throw and which direction you're going. Are you going this way or are you going this way? And then muscle selection comes into play as well. Then we have the schema. Now this is sort of your brain then says, okay, what were the initial conditions? What were the response specifications, right? What am I sort of getting back from when I'm doing it? What am I feeling when I throw it? Sensory consequences, and then the response. Oh, sorry, response specifications are what kind of are you trying to get done? What's the task that you're trying to have accomplished? Sensory consequences. What am I feeling like when I do it? And then the response outcome. Did it work? Did I get the ball to the point I needed it to? Did I get it to first base soon enough to get an out? And then they also talked about the two pieces. I didn't talk about the very end of that, which is a recognition schema and a recall schema, meaning then you'll bring those things back up, recognizing what you need to use, in a maybe similar situation. So to me, basically, you have these memories, you have these patterns, you apply them, maybe you adjust them, maybe they change a little bit. They're not sort of set in stone, but it is this sort of recall memory system. Problems with that is people felt that maybe your brain couldn't possibly store all the uh, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different individual movements. That's just too big of a storage task, and that's kind of why they started working on maybe a different theory. That being, let me get to the evidence for generalized motor program schema before I talk about the dynamic theory. So evidence for this one. I saw an interesting study, generalization of procedural motor sequence learning after a single practice trial. They would do one trial of like a button pushing sequence that related to a second task, B, that was similar. And even after one trial, it improved their performance on B without even repeating it or practicing it, meaning even in that one time through, you're already creating this memory, a kind of thing that you can recall to then do the second piece, with just much more accuracy than you would have otherwise. So again, that sort of, we're storing something away when we learn it and showing that it doesn't even take that many trials, right? In this case, it was only one, and people saw a big improvement in that second task. They would basically did one task and then another task that was related. So that was an interesting one. Another one that was from the book, the electromyography tests of blocked limbs, meaning looking at sort of the nerve impulses and how they fire off, and messages get sent to a limb that's about to do something, but if it gets stopped, and suddenly your arm is, I think about the football player, they go back to pass and then someone grabs their arm, and it causes a fumble maybe in the backfield, right? One of those scenarios. Well, they show that the nerve still fires the same impulse, whether it gets blocked or not. So in other words, the message gets sent, the recall is made, nothing really changes once it gets blocked. So that, to me, again, it's sort of, you have these certain messages, these certain memories that get sent, and then you do that motion. And also think when we talk about ingrained patterns or habit or a real something you've done a million times and you're super good at, you can almost do it automatically. I think of that thought, it's just automatic. The pro baseball player who fields a ball, it's an automatic throw to first. They just boom, they just go right to first, they never miss. That's kind of I think of a sort of a recall from memory kind of deal. Okay, so it's some of the evidence. But as I said, then you talk about, well, does that require too much memory? Does that really, not explain the multitude of different actions that we have to store. So we get to the dynamic system theory, which is non-hierarchical, meaning it's self-organizing movement patterns that are more based on external goals, external constraints. So the idea of constraints comes to this one, where there's individual constraints, environmental constraints, task constraints, and then you really organize what you do based on what you're trying to get done, right? This is, you know, and then you don't need all these separate sort of activity memories or movement memories stored in your brain. And then they talk about changes in movement patterns, and attractors is kind of the idea of an ingrained task, something that is stable. You've done it many times this way. You're very familiar with that pattern of movement. They kind of call that an attractor. But if that gets disrupted or changed, then that's when you reorganize and change. Okay, now I better do things different because things have changed a little bit. And then those control parameters. Are those changing? Are things happening that are different? And then finally, rate limiters, they talked about in terms of injuries or physical limitations or things that are going to change whether you're able to do the movement or not. You know, if I think injury is the easiest one to understand. If you have something that's injured, then you're just not going to be able to do the things you normally would do. Evidence for dynamic theory, they talked about that finger pointing thing, where you know, as you speed up your finger pointing, pretty soon you're sort of out of phase. So shouldn't you be able to have a memory that you know makes that work? Why would that fail, right? So that's what was one evidence cited in the book for the dynamic theory. Another one that I thought was interesting: hidden skills, a dynamic systems analysis of treadmill stepping. So in infants, children under a year, before they could walk, and you may recognize this if you ever held a child of this age, they'll kind of start naturally moving their legs almost in a walking motion. You'll hold them up on a table and they'll kind of start trying to walk. They would do this on the treadmill. So the experiment was kind of hold them up on the treadmill and they will start to walk in a naturalistic walking gait. They've never learned to walk before. They don't know how to walk. They're obviously not supporting their weight as they're walking on a treadmill. You're holding them, but that they can move their legs in this walking pattern that they should not have any memory recall. So there should be no memory or track that they can recall and say, this is how I do it. So is that more evidence for then self-organization? I'm needing to keep my feet moving along a surface underneath me or propel my body along. Is that evidence for then this dynamic theory? So I thought especially, and a lot of the dynamic theory evidence or research was focused on infants and kind of that first learning when you're a blank slate, if you will. Or are you? I don't know. Maybe instinctively there's just these kind of patterns that fire off, you know, at that age as we're starting to learn. So maybe, yeah, who knows? Again, it's kind of an interesting one. But that was cited as evidence for the dynamic theory. So let's get to the final deal here. And in spite of the evidence that I thought was strong with regards to the infant motor development, I still subscribe to the generalized motor program schema theory. I mean, I think for super complex movements, I mean, you have to be taught them. I mean, I write down here problems with self-organization. I mean, if you have a complex task, you're not gonna just self-organize to come to that to that conclusion. Even if you're given a lot of easier parameters or things are changed around a lot. I think there's a lot of memory that gets stored based on what you learn from others, based on what you learned before, and you have to repeat those and call those back up again when you're faced with a new problem. And translatable skills, the idea of if you can throw a ball pretty well, it's going to work across a whole bunch of different sports, say, or different activities, and it's kind of the same thing at its core. Yeah, it needs to be tweaked a little here and there. Your schema may shift depending on those variables that we talked about, right? But I thought that fit pretty well. And speaking to the idea of, well, it's just too much to store in your brain, I feel like the more recent research around brain plasticity and the fact that certain parts of your brain that you use will build up and those neural networks will get stronger. So for example, if you're always throwing a ball and you do that all day, all your life, that's going to be very strong. But a movement you did once a long time ago, is it really going to be stored away? No, I think it kind of that those pathways eventually don't get used, and eventually those branches kind of die off, right? I mean, it's not dissimilar from the computer. When we want to delete something out of memory, it doesn't actually get deleted. What happens is it just allows the computer to rewrite over it, right? So when they go into to do hard drive recovery, right? Some of the stuff's still there if you haven't written it over yet. So to me, it's like I don't know that there's really a storage problem in that we use the ones that are relevant to us, and the other ones other paths kind of die off. So we're not having to maintain every single movement recording for whatever individual thing is. I like that idea that we have a generalized one, and then we work off of that. So thanks.